My brother dumped my fiancé years ago because he was bored. Last weekend, he proposed to her at family dinner to prove I stole her. My brother Mark has been the golden child his entire life. Whatever he wanted, he got. Whatever he did was excused. He hated the idea of me having anything he didn't have and would go out of his way to one-up me on everything. When we were younger, he convinced my parents to let him take my car whenever he wanted because he crashed his and they didn't want him to feel bad about it. Years of that treatment pushed me to go low contact with him the moment I moved out. What I didn't know during that time was that Mark had briefly dated a woman named Jen. They were only together for about a month before he dumped her because he got bored and didn't want to settle down. I never met her, and he never mentioned her. A few years later, I moved back home and met Jen at a bar completely by coincidence. She was easily the most beautiful and intelligent woman I had ever met. We hit it off immediately and started dating shortly after. I had no clue she was Mark's ex until months later when things got serious and I finally introduced her to my family. I showed my parents pictures at dinner, and when the phone got passed to Mark, he completely lost it. He started screaming that I was a terrible brother for dating his ex and demanded I break up with her immediately. I refused. When I asked Jen about it, she confirmed they dated briefly and explained that he was the one who ended things because he didn't want commitment. I figured Mark would get over it eventually, and after a few weeks, he stopped bringing it up. I thought we were past it. On Jen's birthday this year, I took her out to dinner with both of our families and her closest friends. I got down on one knee and proposed. She said yes. Mark blew up again in front of everyone, yelling about how I was rubbing it in his face. My sisters and I shut him down immediately, and the rest of the night went on without him. After that, I barely saw Mark for 2 months. I assumed he went low contact with me, which I honestly preferred. Then out of nowhere, he invited me and Jen to a family dinner at his apartment. My parents and sisters were going too, so we figured it was safe and agreed to show up. Dinner was normal. Nothing fancy. Afterward, we moved to the living room to talk and everything seemed fine. About 30 minutes into the conversation, Mark stood up and said he had an announcement. He gave this long speech about how happy he was to have his family together for such a big moment. Then he got down on one knee, pulled out the cheapest ring I have ever seen, and asked Jen to marry him. The room went dead silent. Jen looked horrified and told him to put it away and stand up. He didn't move. He just kept holding the ring out and staring at her like he expected her to say yes. My dad tried to grab Mark, but I got to him first. I hit him before I even realized what I was doing. I hit him again while he was down. My dad pulled me off and Mark stayed on the floor holding his face. He looked up at me and said he just wanted to show me that Jen was never really into me and that she was only with me to get back at him. Get back at him for what I will never understand. My parents rushed me and Jen out of the apartment before it could escalate further. They promised they would talk to him. It has been 4 days since that dinner, and I have not heard a single word from Mark or my parents. Jen has been quiet too. She keeps saying she's fine, but I can tell something is bothering her. Last night I woke up at 3 in the morning and she wasn't in bed. I found her sitting in the kitchen in the dark staring at her phone. When I asked what she was doing, she locked the screen immediately and said nothing. I didn't push it. This morning after she left for work, I checked the phone records on our family plan. There were 47 text messages between her and Mark in the last 4 days. I haven't opened them yet. I'm not sure I want to know what they say. I sit in my car outside our apartment building for 20 minutes staring at my phone. The text message records are pulled up on the screen showing 47 messages between Jen and Mark. My hands shake as I scroll through the timestamps. They've been talking multiple times every single day since that dinner. At 3 in the morning when I found her in the dark kitchen, she was texting him. I can see it right there in the records. 3:17 a.m., 3:21 a.m., 3:34 a.m. The messages keep going until almost 4 in the morning. I scroll back through the other days and see the same pattern. Morning messages, afternoon messages, late night messages. They've been in constant contact and she never said a word to me about it. I finally force myself to get out of the car because sitting here avoiding this will only make it worse. My legs feel weak as I walk toward the building entrance. I take the stairs instead of the elevator because I need the extra time to figure out what I'm going to say. When I reach our floor, I can smell coffee brewing from inside our apartment. The normalcy of it makes my stomach turn. I unlock the door and walk inside. Jen is standing at the stove making breakfast. She's wearing my old college sweatshirt, and her hair is pulled back in a messy bun. She looks over her shoulder and smiles at me like everything is completely normal, like she hasn't been secretly texting my brother for 4 days straight. I walk over to the counter and put my phone face down between us. She goes back to flipping pancakes. I watch her for a few seconds before I speak. Why have you been texting Mark 47 times in 4 days? She freezes with the spatula in midair. Her face goes pale. The pancake on the griddle starts to burn, but she doesn't move to flip it. I watch her decide in real time whether to lie or come clean. Her mouth opens and closes twice before any words come out. She finally puts the spatula down and turns off the stove. She admits she's been texting Mark, but swears it's not what I think. She says he's been sending her long messages about how sorry he is and how he ruined everything. She says she's been trying to get him to leave us alone. She grabs her phone from the counter and unlocks it. She pulls up the messages and shows them to me. I scroll through and see mostly him sending paragraphs while she sends short responses telling him to stop. But then I see other messages. Messages where she's asking him why he really proposed to her. Messages where she's asking if he actually had feelings back then. Messages where she's asking what he meant when he said she was only with me to get back at him. I realize she's been seeking closure or validation from my brother behind my back. I tell her I understand wanting closure, but going behind my back to get it from Mark feels like a betrayal. Especially after he just tried to humiliate both of us in front of our entire family. She gets defensive immediately. She says I'm being controlling. She says she's allowed to have conversations without reporting every detail to me. She says maybe if my family wasn't so messed up, none of this would be happening. Her voice gets louder with each sentence. I tell her that's not fair. I tell her she knew how much Mark's proposal stunt hurt me, and she chose to engage with him anyway. She says I'm making this about me when it's about her need for closure. I say closure doesn't require dozens of secret text messages at 3 a.m. The fight escalates fast. We're both saying things we don't mean. She brings up how I never want to deal with family problems. I bring up how she always needs validation from other people. Back and forth until neither of us is listening anymore. She finally grabs her keys off the counter. She says she needs space to think about whether she wants to marry into this family drama. The door slams behind her before I can respond. I stand in the kitchen surrounded by the smell of burnt pancakes and listen to her car start in the parking lot below. 2 hours pass. I try calling her 3 times, but she doesn't answer. I clean up the kitchen and throw away the burnt pancakes. I sit on the couch staring at my phone, wondering if she's coming back. Then Brielle calls. She says Mom and Dad want to have a family meeting tonight without Jen there. I tell her I'm not interested in another ambush where they make excuses for Mark. She promises this time is different. She says Mark showed up at their house yesterday crying about how I ruined his life by stealing his ex-girlfriend. Brielle says our parents are finally starting to see how manipulative he's being. I'm not holding my breath, but I agree to come. That evening, I drive to my parents' house. Mark isn't there, but the tension is thick as Mom serves coffee with shaking hands. Dad starts by saying they've been doing a lot of thinking about the family dynamics. He says they realize they may have been too lenient with Mark over the years. I almost laugh because too lenient doesn't begin to cover decades of enabling his entitled behavior. I stay quiet and let him continue. Mom admits that Mark has always been difficult when he doesn't get his way. She says they've made excuses because he was their first child and they didn't want to damage his confidence. She says when he came over crying yesterday about me stealing Jen, she finally saw how delusional he's become. She says he genuinely believes Jen belonged to him and I took something that was his. Dad adds that they've decided Mark needs to see a therapist. They're making it a condition of continuing to support him financially since at 29 he's still partially dependent on them. I tell my parents that therapy for Mark is fine, but it doesn't address the real issue. They've spent my entire life prioritizing his feelings over mine. One conversation doesn't erase that pattern. Brielle backs me up and points out specific examples from our childhood. She reminds them about when they let Mark take my car whenever he wanted after he crashed his own. Cleo adds that she's been keeping her distance from family events for years because watching them baby Mark while dismissing everyone else became unbearable. The conversation shifts when Dad asks about Jen and whether we're still engaged after everything that happened. I admit I don't know because I discovered she's been secretly texting Mark for days. Even though the messages seem mostly innocent, the secrecy feels like a breach of trust. Mom looks genuinely distressed. She says she hopes Jen isn't actually considering Mark because his proposal stunt was clearly a manipulative power play rather than genuine feelings. After the family meeting, I drive to my friend Reed's house because I need to talk to someone outside the family dysfunction. Reed has known me since high school and watched my relationship with Mark deteriorate over the years. He listens to everything without interrupting. Then he asks me the hard question. Do I actually trust Jen, or has Mark's interference poisoned the relationship beyond repair, regardless of what the texts say? Night at Reed's place turns into coffee and silence. He doesn't push me for answers I don't have. I crash on his couch and stare at the ceiling until my eyes burn. Around midnight, my phone buzzes with a long message from Mark. He says he knows he messed up. He says he never actually wanted Jen back. He just couldn't handle seeing me happy when his own life feels empty and meaningless. He admits he's been jealous of me for years because I escaped the family and built my own life, while he stayed stuck trying to live up to being the golden child. The proposal stunt was him trying to prove he could still get whatever he wanted. When Jen rejected him, he realized how pathetic he'd become. I screenshot the message and send it to Brielle. She calls immediately and warns me not to let his sob story make me forget that he deliberately tried to sabotage my engagement. She says this is classic Mark waiting until he faces consequences to suddenly become self-aware and vulnerable. I know she's right, but part of me feels sad for Mark, despite everything. That makes me angry at myself for still caring. Jen comes home the next morning looking like she hasn't slept. We sit down at the kitchen table, and she admits that when Mark started texting her apologies, part of her wanted to understand why he dumped her so casually years ago. Not because she wants him back, but because his rejection damaged her self-worth and she never got closure. His recent messages revealed that he dumped her because he was terrified of commitment and she was getting too serious. That actually helps her realize it was never about her not being good enough. I tell her I understand the need for closure, but I'm hurt she sought it secretly, instead of talking to me first. She apologizes and explains she was afraid I'd see it as her having feelings for Mark, when really she was just trying to heal an old wound. We talk for hours about trust and communication. She promises no more secret conversations with Mark or anyone else. If she needs to work through something, she'll include me in the process. We decide to postpone the wedding planning until we rebuild the trust that Mark's interference damaged. We're still engaged and committed to each other, but we both recognize that getting married right now while everything feels unstable would be a mistake. She suggests couples counseling to work through the family drama and communication issues. I agree because I want our relationship to survive this stronger than before. 3 weeks into couples counseling, our therapist helps us see that Mark's behavior exposed existing cracks in our relationship. I have trust issues from watching my family prioritize Mark my whole life. Jen has abandonment issues from her past that Mark's rejection made worse. The counselor points out that Mark didn't create these problems. He just provided the pressure that revealed them. This changes how we approach healing because we're addressing our individual wounds rather than just blaming Mark. According to Brielle, Mark starts therapy like our parents required, and he's actually taking it seriously for once. His therapist apparently told him he has traits that come from being overpraised as a child. He's working on understanding how his need for constant validation hurts the people around him. I'm not sure Mark can really change, but Cleo points out that at least he's trying, which is more than he's ever done before. A month after the disastrous dinner, Mark asks through Brielle if he can meet me for coffee to apologize in person. I'm not sure about it, but Jen encourages me to hear him out. She says holding on to anger is hurting me more than it's hurting Mark. I agree to meet him at a neutral coffee shop, with the understanding that one apology doesn't fix everything, but it might be a start. Mark shows up looking genuinely humble for the first time in his life. He apologizes without making excuses or trying to minimize what he did. He admits he's been a terrible brother. His jealousy poisoned our relationship. The proposal stunt was cruel and manipulative. He says his therapist is helping him understand that our parents' favoritism damaged both of us. Me by being neglected, and him by never learning to take responsibility. He's not asking for forgiveness right away. Just a chance to slowly rebuild trust over time. I tell Mark I appreciate the apology, but I need to see real change before I can trust him again. That means respecting my boundaries with Jen and stopping the manipulative behavior. He agrees and says he's also working with his therapist on getting his own life together. Finding a job that isn't funded by our parents. Moving into his own apartment. Building an identity separate from being the golden child. For the first time in years, I feel a small bit of hope that maybe we could eventually have a real brother relationship. 2 months after the proposal incident, Jen and I are in a much better place after consistent counseling and honest communication. We've set a new wedding date for next fall, giving us time to strengthen our foundation and make sure we're getting married for the right reasons. My relationship with my parents is still strained, but they're making genuine efforts to treat all their children equally and acknowledge their past mistakes. Mark follows through on his promises and gets a job as a sales manager at a local company. He moves into a modest apartment across town. He starts dating someone new, a woman named Maya, who doesn't know our family history and treats him like a regular person rather than the golden child. Brielle says Mark seems happier and more grounded than she's seen him in years, though we're all being careful rather than assuming he's completely changed. At Thanksgiving dinner 3 months later, the family dynamic feels different in subtle but important ways. Mom and Dad make an effort to ask about everyone's lives equally, instead of centering conversation around Mark. Mark himself is quieter and more thoughtful, rather than taking over every discussion. When Dad proposes a toast to family, Mark adds his own toast specifically to me and Jen. He wishes us happiness and apologizes again for trying to ruin our engagement. Jen squeezes my hand under the table, and I realize we're actually going to be okay. Jen and I are planning our wedding for next October, and this time the excitement feels pure instead of tainted by family drama. Mark has maintained appropriate boundaries and is even helping Dad with some of the wedding prep. He's treating it like a chance to support me rather than compete. My relationship with my parents will probably never be perfect, but they're trying, and that's more than I expected. Most importantly, Jen and I came through this crisis with better communication and deeper trust. I'm confident we can handle whatever challenges come next because we've already survived the worst.